Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vicki Janowski, editor of the Greater Wilmington Business Journal, and thanks for joining us for this week's WilmingtonBiz Talk. Hurricane season is underway, so today we have the heads of the Tri-County area's Emergency Management and Emergency Services Director talking to us about what to expect this season and what their preparations are looking like. Tommy Batson from Pender County, Ed Conroe from Brunswick County, and Stephen Still from New Hanover County, the Emergency Management or Emergency Services Director of their respective counties, will be here today to answer questions about the look ahead, what they're looking at in terms of preparations, and also to answer any of your questions about hurricane season. So if you're watching this on our Facebook live stream, feel free to post questions in the comments field and I will pass it along to them as we have our conversation for the next 20-30 minutes. But in the meantime, let's hear a quick word from our sponsors, Cape Fear Realtors, and we'll be back with you in just a minute.
Hello, I'm Ann Gardner, CEO of Cape Fear Realtors. Realtors support this program's efforts to connect our community in meaningful dialogue with actionable insights. Realtors are dedicated professionals who build strong, resilient communities and businesses. Work with someone you can trust. Work with a realtor. Learn more at capefear.realtor.
So June 1st marked the start of the Atlantic hurricane season. And this year, according to NOAA, is going to be an above average active year as well, coming off the heels of last year, which saw record-breaking activity also. So joining us today, we have the emergency officials from the 3 counties in our area to talk a little bit about what they're doing to prepare and what other businesses and residents, many of whom this might be the first hurricane season for them if they are newcomers to our area, should be expecting. So just to kick us off, I mentioned the NOAA's Climate Center prediction. They are predicting a possible range of 13 to 20 named storms this hurricane season. And as anyone who was here during Hurricane Florence in recent years, or even in Brunswick County and Hurricane Isaias last year, knows that even a Category 1 hurricane can cause quite a bit of damage. So just to kick us off, Stephen, could you share with us a little bit about where New Hanover County is in terms of preparations for the year?
Yeah, for New Hanover County, in terms of preparations, we're adapting to a ever-changing landscape. COVID really threw us for a loop last year when it comes in terms of evacuation, emergency operations, congregate and non-congregate sheltering, and FEMA's reimbursement for those activities. And so they're changing every day. So we really have frameworks. We don't necessarily have plans because we have to be prepared to adapt when these changes come. Even as far as 2 weeks ago, we found out that FEMA's not reimbursing for non-congregate sheltering, some of the hotel placement. So we're rolling with the punches. We're making changes as they come, but we're also re-solidifying some of the plans that we have in place for our shelters and our pre-position contracts with the local businesses, and making sure everything's firmed up in hopes that nothing happens.
And Edward, over there in Brunswick County, what are you looking ahead toward, or how are you preparing for this year's season?
Like Stephen said, we're trying to hit a moving target with COVID restrictions, how it's going to impact our sheltering. I know we spent the past couple months reviewing our plans, updating our plans, but they're kind of fluid because as we direction with COVID, reduced restrictions, doing the messaging, and checks going through equipment, making sure everything's up to par. Plans that we've updated last year to see what we need to change, what we need to improve. I think our biggest impact that we have now is our population growth. I think like somebody said that we're seeing such an influx of population and people coming to our county in the surrounding areas that aren't familiar with hurricanes. They're coming
All right, Edward, your connection's breaking up a little bit on your Zoom.
That are inland that don't deal with her. I think that messaging and education piece is very important. Let me zoom out and plug me back in.
Okay, I'll let you reconnect in the new world of Zoom. But in the meantime, Tommy, you became Pender County's Emergency Management Director in March, but this is not your first hurricane season in the coast, correct?
You're correct. I've worked with the county in every shape or form since Hurricane Fran, and we've been updating our plans, been doing some staff and training, as well as reaching out to our partner agencies across the county, across the region, trying to prepare for the storm season. And no matter if it's a slow season or a busy season, it only takes one storm to be a bad season. And an example is Andrew was a bad season. It was a slow season, but Andrew hit Florida, and you asked South Florida what happened when Andrew hit. It was the worst situation they ever had. But we're working with all our partner agencies as well as the state agencies, trying to get everything in place. But we've got to be bendable and fluid depending on the situation and what happens. And one of the biggest things, as they said, with COVID, it changed our whole entire sheltering process, as well as our special need population. And trying to, where do we put people in the time of need? How do we get them there? And COVID, hopefully, we're still going to have to follow some requirements, but that has really strained our operation from in the field as well into the EOC.
I mean, that was a good point you were mentioning about like the nature of the season and whether that could be misleading or not. And I mentioned earlier, the category strength can sometimes be misleading, especially for our area. If you think about Hurricane Floyd and you think about Hurricane Florence, those are major flooding events for this area. Pender County in particular get walloped pretty hard in terms of flooding. What would you say are things that have happened in the past couple of years, particularly since Florence, maybe that could mitigate some of those flood potentials going forward?
Flooding is one of our largest threats in the county 3 to 7 days after a hurricane event, if we have a large rain event during that process. We are still working with some mitigation. We're working through mitigation on buyouts, elevations, which this is not an overnight event. We are still working on projects from Matthew and Florence. And we probably saw at least half our county was covered in water for at least 3 or 4 days. And the simple fact is they're unable to get to and from, move commodities in and out of the county, moving staff in and out, back and forth to and from work, as well as businesses moving product and employees to and from, was a taxing need for almost 2 weeks after Hurricane Florence here in the county. So it's not only emergency services, our businesses, our schools, everybody that works and lives here and travels through here had to deal with that for a couple of weeks. And between the tri-counties, I know it was a long process to get from just simply as Burgall to Wilmington or Wilmington to Charlotte. It was a very challenging time, but we adapted and overcome with all entities and all agencies.
Stephen, the road closures we experienced during Hurricane Florence was a significant issue. And when things got real dicey in terms of people being stuck outside of Wilmington or within Wilmington, and at one point what that did to fuel supplies. Since then, since 2018, what measures have been put in place to try to safeguard against that same scenario happening again?
Yeah, quite a bit here in New Hanover. Unfortunately, we have that experience, particularly with fuel just recently. But there was a lot of lessons learned during Florence. One in particular that the county has done is, which is unique to counties, is we've implemented a stormwater utility. So we're really starting to hit those trouble flooding areas in the county, put together some good projects to reduce the flooding in those neighborhoods that affect homes and roads of ingress and egress out of those communities. And that's a really good one. One of the other great lessons learned is really doubling down on your partnership with the businesses and industry that you have in your community. We were completely cut off for a period of time. Certainly don't want to be there again, but the possibility exists. A lot of our pre-existing contracts were with out of region, out of state, out of town contractors to bring in commodities, and they were just simply cut off. So we worked really hard with the local business community just to say, hey, what do you guys have locally? What are your operations during a storm? Do you evacuate? Do you have local staff that can run your storefront, your industry? Do you have alternate power that we can tap into, say, for fuel by using our local terminals, as opposed to getting it out of county, out of state? And so a lot of those pre-position contacts, doubling down on local business was a huge lesson learned from us. And it certainly was a benefit just recently when we had a fuel issue.
Let me open it up. Yeah, any other lessons learned that you feel have come on the past year or two that you think might better your counties in Brunswick and Pender?
I think COVID has really shown us the need, and emergency management, we always rely on partnerships. We're really depending on the partnerships and solidifying them partnerships. You know, I wasn't here for Hurricane Florence, but since then we've had, you know, 2 smaller hurricanes, but last year Hurricane Isaias, which was everyone played off as nothing. And we got hit exactly what the weather service said, the hazardous impact of storm surge. And it really put a dent in us, really hurt us for a little while operating on COVID. And then just recently, the tornado we had to come through our county. If we didn't have them solid partnerships, we would not have been as successful as we had. So not only is partnerships of helping us with commodities and supporting us, but I think a lot of these businesses and partnerships we have are helping foster the putting the message out of where you're at in Brunswick County, some of the impacts you need to be concerned with. And that's helping us with a lot of the new population coming in our county. So, but the partnerships are, you know, are worth $1 million when it comes to a major event.
And I'll add to that, Ed. One of the things we noticed with COVID and activation, possibly with Isaias last year, that Brunswick took a direct hit, working remotely. As long as there's internet and power, that option is there. But the minute you lose power, the minute you use the internet, then we're back to in-person working together. And I mean, pre-storm, a couple weeks out up to a landfall and storm, there may be a lot more remote working, conference calls and Zoom meetings. That's something a lot of us had never really took into the concept of using on a day-to-day basis. And now with COVID and being restricted to home or limited number of staffing, they will be utilized a lot more for briefings and information as well as situational reports up to the time of a landfall and storm.
And Tom, you brought up a good point with that. And we've seen that recently with the remote working. You know, a lot of people working remotely, but how many people have generators, backup power? So remote's good until we lose the power, at least in our emergency operations centers, our county facilities. You know, we're a little more resilient with power. So that is a challenge we're trying to overcome and educate people that remote's cool, but when we have that major event, sometimes we need that in person just to make sure we're able to keep functioning.
And speaking of COVID, I would imagine last year's season was probably even more stressful on you and your operations and your teams, because as Hurricane Isaias came in August, we were still just in the middle of the pandemic, and that had to have changed all the sheltering plans and how you even possibly social distance when people are sheltering from a storm, major or minor. So you guys went through all that last year. Where does it stand this year? Is it a little bit closer to sheltering plans the way they were previously, or have those permanently changed how you guys view shelter in place with the schools or whatever other facilities that you use in your counties?
I'll start it off for the team. We continue to remain able to split up our shelters. We're continuing to maintain the PPE and equipment and staffing that's required to, if we do open a public shelter, to keep people spaced out, to keep the meals in individually boxed containers. And we're continuing that based on if the need arises, we can still implement that, but hoping and praying that we can continue as we have in the past. But we still, the extent of staffing and personnel that will take to run a shelter under COVID conditions is 2 to 3 times as much as it normally is. And we are continuing to plan on that if it's needed. And if not, we can always reduce the amount of staffing and personnel and equipment and supplies that are needed to staff up a shelter.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of what Tommy said. And one thing that we're really pushing out through our communication and outreach partners is please try to make a plan for yourself to use friends, use family, use whatever resources necessary, that if there is an evacuation, you personally have a place to go. You are not counting on local county sheltering to serve that purpose, because there's no way that we can truly fully eliminate the risk of COVID in a congregate setting. It's nearly impossible. So we're trying to, work hard with people now to build those plans now, have your preparations in place. If an evacuation decision comes, that you have the tools necessary to evacuate yourself, that you're not relying on county government to put you in a congregate facility that could potentially have the risk of COVID.
Yeah, and to top on that with Stephen, Brunswick County is still taking a stance of we want our shelters to be shelters of last resort. We're encouraging you to find places, but know that if we get to that situation, we're going to shelter and do our best we can to protect the citizens and the people that are here. Yeah, we're still going to try doing social distancing the best we can, and to help us do that, it's just get a plan ahead of time, and if you have friends or family outside of the region, now's the time to make sure you know what that plan is and you'll be able to implement it quickly.
Can you all explain that evacuation process a little bit more? Where does the call come from in terms of implementing voluntary and mandatory evacuations? Does it differ county by county? And what are some of the things that officials look at when they are determining whether or not to actually take that specific step?
Here in Pender County, I'm luckier that New Hanover and Brunswick, I only have 2 municipalities on the island of Topsail Island. We start the coordination and discussion 10 days out of a storm. We continue to send press releases and situation reports out, and we speak with the elected officials there on a daily basis. When we're down to the 5-day mark, that's when they're going to look at, that's when the communities are looking at, do they or do they not? They're making their preparations, and depends on the approach of the storm, the speed of the storm, the magnitude of the storm, and the estimated storm surge. And our 2 beach towns, Topsail Beach as well as Surf City, communicate with us, and they will make the call for the barrier islands. It's their town, their municipality, and North Topsail communicates with Surf City and Topsail Beach, and if they choose to, we support that operation. But the elected officials and the control groups of each town meet with us on a daily basis, and we discuss what's going on, what our threat level is, and what the magnitude is. And the simple is speed, intensity, and approach all come together on what the estimated models are. And we work very closely with the National Weather Service in Wilmington, as well as we all work close with the National Hurricane Center on their forecast of what we're going to see. And the beach towns here normally make that decision, but we give them recommendations. And if they choose to, they can call a voluntary. And that's sort of to get everybody to get off the island that can, try to get the out of town people out. Most of our storms are after the tour season, after Labor Day. But then once they make a required or mandatory evacuation, that says, hey, if you choose to stay, you're restricted to your property until that is lifted.
And in Brunswick, we're not as fortunate because we have a lot more municipal partners, but I think we've done a lot in that. I could speak for the past 2 years of working with them and communicating with them and trying to make unified decisions. And we take the same boat, based on the information we get from National Weather Service, the Hurricane Center. We usually strongly encourage them. We meet with them regular and say, let's make unified decisions that are smart based on the hazards and impacts. We tried doing the pre-evacuation of tourists and restrict visitors from coming in. But like I said, we work together. It's a little harder having multiple municipal partners and then having an island that basically we have to evacuate by ferry. It takes a little bit of coordination, but it's just, I think staying focused, having good information, having good partnerships and speaking with them and trying to get it collectively. And then the hard part is the first questions that's asked, we're evacuating, when can we come back? And that's the hard part. And we've been doing a lot of that recently. A lot of the towns were getting calls from people that have just moved here and, if I evacuate, how do I get back to my town? And, trying to get that education piece is the biggest thing.
Yeah, and that's one reason why I wanted to bring up that question. For many people, like you have referenced, Ed, that there are a lot of people that have moved to this area in the past year during 2020, especially as remote working became more the norm. So for many people, like I mentioned earlier, this is their first hurricane season, so they may never have gone through an evacuation process or, like you said, coming back in. What are some of your other advice or things to know for on both the business side and the resident side for people who have moved to the area?
I would say on our side, I think the most important is, be engaged with your community partners. If you're a business or a new resident, don't be afraid to reach out to your municipal partners, your county partners, and see what you need to do. Planning is the biggest thing. Have a plan, know what to do, where you're going to go. Talk to other businesses. There's a lot of community groups. Talk to other businesses, see what they do, see the impacts they have. And I can speak for myself. I've been here 2 years. Look, I came from a hurricane area, but not as significant as this. I mean, we're kind of like the the bullseye of the East Coast. But it's just educate yourself, and have them plans in place, know what you're going to do. Is the most important thing. Don't wait till the last minute when you're getting encouraged to leave and you're not sure where to go.
Stephen,
I'll add on to Ed's speaking. We always preach, plan for your family, your loved ones, and your pets. One thing that has dropped a lot we've noticed after Florence was, what's the plan for your business? Do you plan to close? Do you not plan to close? If you do close, or how many of your staff, and we had this locally, how many of your staff are going to go out of town? Your employees may or may not leave the area. And then what is your process of reopening as a company or a business, as well as local government? Because during Florence, a lot of our people took the advice and evacuated and then couldn't return. So we had very limited staff. And so on the business side is, what is your plan within your facility or your company or your store? How many people plan to leave? How many people don't? Do you need to open up as soon as the storm clears? Do you not need to? Are you a critical facility and supports other entities within the local area? So I think that's one of the things that we always talk about: family, loved ones, and pets, but we never talk about our businesses. And I think that's something after Florence, with the magnitude of the flooding, that people couldn't return and businesses couldn't open on a normal basis as we would once the power turned back on. And I think that's just something that all entities and all companies and businesses need to look into.
And Steve, what's your parting advice?
Yeah, I would say, we have kind of three pillars here, and really they go towards the individuals and the family. It's have a plan, build a kit, and stay informed. But it really goes towards businesses as well. As Tommy put it, we rely so heavily on our major industries as well as our local small businesses. The sooner that they are open running, the sooner we get back to some sense of normalcy. So that, have a plan really for small businesses is where are those essential documents? What do you have to have if you were to lose your storefront, or you were to lose contact with your customers and your employees? What are the things you need that you can have that continuity of operations that, drives your business? Build a kit. Really, on the individual side, it's all the things that you need to sustain yourself for 72 hours. So think about that in the business sense for your operations. Can you do it remotely? Can you do it virtually? There's a lot to wrap your head around for that, and really staying informed is making sure that you're getting the right information and making operational decisions on the best information, so that you can make the right decisions for yourself, your business, so on.
I want to thank all three of you for taking your time out today to join us and checking in at the beginning of this year's season. It is my greatest hope that I don't talk to you at all for the next several months, but if the event happens and we do have a major storm coming towards us, we'll be checking in with you, I'm sure, and have coverage throughout the Business Journal and our daily channels. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. If you want to read more about what some of the preparations are from the county, not just from the official side, but also from the private sector, including Duke Energy's plans and what they've changed in recent years to prepare for hurricane season, and Cape Fear Public Utility Authority, another important component of continuing operations when a hurricane hits. Pick up tomorrow's newest edition of the Greater Wilmington Business Journal, which will be out on stands tomorrow and online at WilmingtonBiz.com. If you want to catch up with any of our previous Wilmington Biz Talks, you can find our podcast on your favorite podcast streaming channel or at WilmingtonBizTalk.com. So we want to thank everybody. We hope you have a good weekend, and we'll see you here next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.